Welcome to another edition of the Bird Call. First, we got to welcome back our friend, our brother, the one and only Oleh Kosel. It's been far too long, buddy. Glad to see you back. Do you want to share why you've been gone, or do you just want to just welcome yourself back?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's been a while. Yeah, I mean, had some family issues to deal with, and I personally ended up in a hospital myself, having to deal with, fighting an infection and a terrible reaction to poison ivy. So, yeah, taking care of the folks in Cincinnati. Then I came back with something from their backyard, which knocked me in the hospital. So, yeah, it's been a long month for me. So I'm happy to be back.
We're glad to have you, man, and especially doing what you love to do, which is talk NBA basketball, particularly these New Orleans Pelicans. And last night was the 2023 NBA draft. First and foremost, the big speculation was whether or not the Pelicans would make a deal to move up to either the second or third spot in an attempt to get Scoot Henderson. That did not materialize. The Charlotte Hornets did take Brandon Miller with the second pick, which made the impetus really on the Pelicans to include Zion Williamson in any package that would go to Portland. They were not willing to do that. Zion stays with the Pelicans. Brandon stays with the Pelicans. Your reaction to that first and foremost?
I'm no surprise that nothing happened. Look, one thing that we've learned with David Griffin is he has his eyes set on several people in every draft. And usually there's at least one or two above the Pelicans draft point, right? Wherever they're drafting. So, for instance, I know he's had his eye in the past on Franz Wagner, Josh Giddey. A couple of years ago, it was Patrick Williams. He really wanted to trade up and get him when Chicago, I believe, took him fourth in that Kyra Lewis draft. So, like I said, he's always highlighted people. He's always looked to move up. But, David, as you know, usually the costs of moving up, especially when it's a real high draft pick, especially when it comes to, like, say, Scoot Henderson, you've got to think that the costs are astronomical. And as you just mentioned, the fact that the Pelicans were not ever going to put Brandon Ingram on the table, I don't think they were even going to put Zion Williamson on the table. I don't know how you could have possibly gotten that pick, right? Whether it's from Charlotte or from Portland. So if you don't have your two major studs, right, on the table, that kind of makes it more an equal trade, right, in terms of the value, then it wasn't going to happen. So that was just, I think it was just a wish list that got out. And I think Griff and, of course, the Pelicans front office really like Scoot Henderson. They're already thinking ahead, it tells me, because, look, you've got Brandon, max contract. He's going to be due for another max in a couple of years, and that max is going to be a lot more expensive than this one. Zion is starting his max. Now with this new CBA, more than likely, you're going to be able to pay two maxes, and then you're really going to have to be smart with your money. And when you realize CJ McCollum just signed an extension, Pels have other pieces, yeah, it's smart to start planning now for the future.
Yeah, and I think ultimately this is something that you and I talked about before any of, we got to draft week. This team with Zion Williamson, 114 games with Zion on the floor, no matter who is. We know it's only 92 games with him and BI, 93 games. And they're 46 and 47. They're 46 and 40. So they're right at 500, just under 500 with those two. But with Zion, they're 57 and 57. So they are a 500 team. Overall, though, the franchise with everybody all taken is about a 45% winning percentage. It shows that Zion is an impactful player. It doesn't matter who he's playing with. He impacts winning. And I think ultimately, if you're David Griffin, you saw what you saw last year, and we talked about this. You were in first place, regardless of the circumstances. You understand that the NBA changes every year. There were a lot of things that you can point to, but you were what you were at the time. You were what you were after 39 games. You were in first place in the West at that point. So you saw what you could potentially be. And I think with only 114 games of this, you have to believe that David Griffin has to be, that he's saying, I am willing to bet that this young man grows up and matures individually. And I'm betting on his health for 1 or 2 years. Because like you said, with BI in this extension, you're just trying to get 2 healthy years out of Zion, really. If you can get the next 2 years healthy under with BI and him and writing these contracts, and you can make moves around them as it goes, while you still got Trey, relatively inexpensive. Herb is still going to be relatively inexpensive. You can make some deals around the periphery. I think David Griffin says, unless they make me blow it up by just being awful or quitting on this, I got to give it one more chance.
Yeah, because it's more than just health at play here. People just want to point at that 114 games ready to jump ship, right? I think I saw half the fan base wanting Scoot Henderson straight up for Zion, which I think is ridiculous. I think Zion is obviously, as a generational talent, more valuable, and we saw that. That's the thing. Between his rookie season to now, even though he's played those 114 games, he's a much improved player, David. He's now a much better facilitator we saw last year. He was now coming up big in clutch minutes. And it happened on both ends of the court. That's the biggest thing to me. We started seeing him doing things defensively that we saw at Duke finally, right, in his fourth year. So you can't give up on
You
that.
saw him caring about winning.
That's an MVP style player out there, right? So you absolutely have to ride it out, especially when, like I said, there's no better options. There's nothing obviously better out there.
And Ollie, this is what bothers me. This is a fan base that still laments the fact that the Pelicans did not overspend to retain DeMarcus Cousins coming off of an Achilles tear. Remember, there's a significant amount. Every year you hear about people say they should have just paid him more money. They should have offered him more money to come back. Boogie Cousins, here we are. Zion Williams, Boogie, as talented as Boogie was. We love Boogie. You and I both love his game. As talented, he's not Zion Williamson. Zion Williamson, best, is the only player that this franchise has ever had who can win you a championship. He's the only one. And to throw that away, you better be sure, because you're betting a lot of people's careers on that. The loss in keeping him is far less in the loss in giving him away and watching him flourish somewhere else in the next year or two.
We saw him play 29 games, but between game one and towards before he got hurt, I saw a player who was commanding the attention of three different individual defenders on the best defenses. The Bucks. Remember that? They were loading up when he had the ball. So Drew was on him, Giannis and Brook Lopez in help coverage near the rim. Sixers did the same thing. PJ Tucker on him. Then you had Tobias Harris and Embiid floating around in the same area. And that took Zion a minute, but that tells me, boy, three different guys on one. And then you've also got Brandon Ingram, but Brandon wasn't playing at the time. But imagine if Brandon was. Now you've got Trey. Teams are going to have to pick their poison. That's why you've got to keep Zion. He is such a wrecking ball, David. He's such an efficient offensive machine scorer, despite the fact he draws all this attention, right? He's only going to get better. We saw his free throw percentage has improved. I've already mentioned the defense. He started shooting things outside of the layup, right? Shooting more kind of deeper in the lane, even a few shots outside of the lane. I think that's going to continue to grow. So he, to me, is still so young, right? I mean, in terms of those
counters, he hasn't seen enough defensively to have counter moves yet.
Yeah. But the improvements we've seen is what I'm pointing to. That's why I am so still optimistic. You just got to figure out a way to get him healthy, especially for him. Somebody's got to reach him, David, right? To where he really, right? Basketball, I know you're only 22, but you've been doing this for 4 years. It is time to get serious, 100% all the time.
Yeah, and we'll see if that happens, but you got to make that bet if you're the New Orleans Pelicans, because you don't. The fact of the matter is, if you give up Zion Williamson, you give up the opportunity to win a championship.
Yes. Who's the next MVP? Right? Who's the next potential MVP candidate you're bringing in? We don't think
until you get another
that guy.
Until you get another one of these.
Scoot Henderson is not likely to be that talent, right?
Show me the 6'2" guy who's done it, who's not named Isaiah Thomas. You know what I'm saying? Steph Curry is 6'4" and shoots it from 40 feet. That's not Scoot Henderson. Even if Scoot Henderson lives up to the comparisons, Russell Westbrook, John Wall, whatever, those are all number one picks who never got past the first round of a playoff series as the lead player. And the Pelicans as a team have never gotten past the first round with anybody on this roster. So what are you adding to that? You're not adding winning, and you're not raising the ceiling. You're raising your floor, but that cannot be the goal. And if David Griffin settles for that type of floor raising by giving away your best player, not fixing your bench, not dealing with those types of things, if you give away your best player to raise your floor, this has not Ben Simmons. I don't see Zion as a kid who doesn't want to play basketball. I see this as a young man who's going through some stuff, who needs to figure it out and grow up and become a professional. But ultimately, I think he wants to play basketball. He wants to be liked, and he wants to win. I believe all three of those things to be true.
I do too. And I'm glad you're mentioning this, because that's a good comparison. I'm around the team a lot, where it's practices or just getting before games and such. And so I've had a lot of that kind of contact with all of these players firsthand. And I'll tell you what, Zion does say hi to ushers. He says hi to me in passing. I also see that he cares. So when you read about him being so disjointed by several outlets, said in passing just one or two sentences saying where he doesn't hang out with teammates, that's kind of true, right? Yes, he does in the offseason stick more to himself, right? He's not the type that's going to organize workouts, or at least he hasn't. He's not the type that's going to hang out with teammates every single night, right? But at the same time, that doesn't make him a bad teammate, is what I'm getting at. Because
He's not
everything I see
aloof.
is that his teammates really like him,
Yeah,
and he
he's
likes
not
them.
aloof or distant. He's just not the leader.
Not yet. He may get there, but definitely not right now. And so people have to understand it's not either or. He's somewhere in the middle. So what I'm saying is there's still hope that he could really turn all this around, right? That's another reason why I think we should actually be singing the praises of David Griffin, because boy, those Zion rumors got loud. I'm reading outlets from the Ringer, for instance, saying you've got to trade Zion now. Otherwise, you're going to have another Bradley Beal situation on your hands. And that's laughable. Beal was in Washington for 11 years. They had a mediocre team for what, the last five
Right.
or six?
They made the
right?
playoffs
And
five
how's
straight
that
years.
and how's that the Pelicans? How's that Zion? No. So yeah, people love to jump to a narrative, go to either end, and we're nowhere there on either end.
And Bradley Beal, yeah, again, Bradley Beal's never an MVP candidate. Bradley Beal would no. You're not talking about, at no point were you saying Bradley Beal was one of the top 3 or 4 players in the league. Never. And people who
Yeah, and when you trade Zion, guess what? You're not just getting a few seconds and pick swaps for Zion. I don't care if he's going to have even.
You better get at least the Gobert deal. You better get a Gobert deal.
Yeah, you can't sell low on a talent like that. That's right. Yeah.
No, and the other part people need to remember too is, as good as Zion's statistics were last year, as you talked about those first 10 games of the season when he was trying to relearn how to play NBA basketball because he had not played in a year at more than a year.
Yeah, you saw it in his finishing. He couldn't finish. He didn't have that touch
in games.
Yep.
During that. That's not Zion Williamson. 50% is not Zion Williamson. 65%, 63%, that's Zion Williamson. So you take those 10 games and you pull that out and you talk about those last 19 that he played. Yeah, I mean, look, the sky is still the limit, and I think you just have to bet on talent. All right, let's talk about the guy that the Pelicans did take, the guy that you thought would be the acceptable option based on who most people thought he would. By the consensus, he was the second most picked player for the Pelicans at spot 14, Jordan Hawkins, the 6'4" combo guard out of UConn. What do you like about Jordan Hawkins?
Well, everybody already knows, right? One of the best, if not the best shooter coming out. He's got the prettiest form. He shot 40%. He's really good when it comes to spot ups. So anything that's basically going to be where he's not creating his own offense, he's a walking bucket from really anyone on the court. And that has, of course, been one of the Pelicans' biggest issues, right, over the last few years, shooting. They don't have enough. So when at 13, you saw Hawkins and Grady Dick sitting there, I got excited because I would be happy with either one. And of course, the Pelicans did end up with one. They ended up with a guy who I think that Trajan Langdon and David Griffin did a good job in describing to us after the draft last night. I think it's important that he had 2 years in college, that he went through a championship run, right? 6 games. And David, he shined. He scored.
And he wasn't great as a freshman.
Yeah, the amount of improvement he also had from his freshman year, sophomore year, you almost can't even compare the seasons. You saw it in his skill set, his comfortableness. And I personally saw him play a couple of games before the March Madness. I always like to do that with several prospects. And the 2 games I picked actually was against Villanova because I also wanted to see Cam Whitmore. And I'll tell you what, in that December matchup, their first matchup, Cam Whitmore didn't even look like an NBA prospect. I know he was just fresh off of coming off of some kind of injury where he didn't get to start playing at the start of the season, right, with his team. But anyways, my eyes went to Jordan Hawkins. And that was simply because this guy is a constant mover. They say he's the best movement shooter. But I also liked everything else he did on the court. So that's why I'm not going to talk to you more about the shooting. It's the other things I saw that makes me think he's going to be able to give you real minutes on an NBA floor. I know he's tiny. First thing you notice him, he's really thin, David. And that's my biggest thing. He's got to put on weight, and it's good weight, right? Strength. Because to me, he looks like Tyrese Halliburton got zapped with like a miniaturizer gun, right? Stand about the same height, but boy, that muscle mass is nowhere close. But they have like the same shoulder build, right? They kind of have that same frame to me. but Hawkins looks like he's maybe 40 pounds lighter. That's got to change. But what I saw on the court is he can get you other plays. He can make other plays. Like he's a willing defender. You see him running out of closeouts. He's alert off the ball. So he's in the good position when he's off the ball. He's in the right space, in the right stance. So when someone's trying to make a cross-court pass, for instance, he's getting a hand on it. I saw him in that second game against Villanova come up with one steal just because he was alert, tipped another. And then everything else, honestly, that comes down to me is he's just smart. He's just savvy. He knows how to play the game. And I think that's the type, and Fish mentioned this on a tweet, there's a type that the Pelicans are looking for. They want actual basketball players who are grinders, who will fight. And I'll tell you what, he impressed me. As for Whitmore's got issues with a motor, understanding just the simplest things about the game, Hawkins is just the opposite. You know, for instance, I saw him, even though he's not a point guard, he's directing his teammates on offense. So it tells me his focus, it's ultra sharp. He's eager to execute. And then, for instance, a shot goes up, he's boxing out. He had to box out Whitmore on one play. He didn't do a good job, but he did enough to where one of his teammates grabbed the ball.
I mean, he's an adequate rebounder for a kid that frail.
Like, yeah, and they did this, David. Let me just mention this other fact. Then there was a shot that went up on his side. He crashed the glass because he knew where the ball was coming off, because his instincts are good. He got to the ball ahead of Whitmore and had the putback. So even though Whitmore is by far the bigger, better athletic specimen, Hawkins outshined him easily. And so that stood out to me. So like I said, the Hawkins pickup, I think, is fantastic for the Pels. They needed more shooting, but this guy's not going to embarrass himself because of things that maybe people think he can't do on a court. I think in time, like Trajan Langdon said, once he picks up on the speed of the game, he's going to be fine.
Yeah, here's what I like about him. And because, you know, one of the things you understand is that if the Pelicans are a healthy team, there are not a lot of minutes to go around. So you have to, we said any rookie who came in needed to have a skill set that other people didn't have, that it was going to get you on the floor. And I think it's going to be very interesting, and we'll talk about Summer League in a moment, but I think it's going to be very interesting if you get to see a lineup with Kyra Lewis at the point, Jordan Hawkins at the 2, and Dyson Daniels at the 3. Because I like that group with Kyra penetrating, and Kyra's a guy who has that extra length, even at his 6'4", is longer than that. You know, Hawkins is a guy, like you said, that narrow build, kind of a Richard, compared a lot to Richard Hamilton.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
But also in his style of movement, his ability to cut around screeners and his ability to read defenses and get into those gaps in the area and get off a shot very quickly. That's something a bench player needs to be able to do. You're not going to get a lot of time to make your shot. You're usually going to be at the end of a shot clock. So you need to be coming off of movement and prepared to set your feet quickly, or you need to be able to operate in that mid-range when things are chaotic, get up a floater or a shot or short range shot. And I think he can do all of those things in short bursts, which is all you're going to ask him to do if this team is playing the way it's supposed to.
Pelicans need another guy that's going to create gravity out there. And it can't be Zion or BI, where the attention, of course, is on them with the ball, mostly, right? Of course, you've got Trey, CJ McCollum to an extent too, but that was it. And of course, if you have any injuries, well, you're behind the 8 ball. So I think Hawkins instantly gives it to you, because not only can he make the shot, especially the open ones, he can move amazingly well. And it's not just to create himself 3-point shots.
Right.
You know, in the 2 games I saw, he was back cutting through the lane 5 times a half, it seemed like. Guess what? His teammates never found him. They don't know how to play basketball, right? So they miss him. He wasn't like hanging his head, but he kind of, you could see like, well, you missed me again. His teammates here on the Pelicans, they're not going to miss him, right? NBA players don't miss those type of plays. So I just feel like I said, his gravity, because they were face guarding him and he was getting constantly free. He knows how to get himself open. So I love that for the Pelicans offense. And like you mentioned, David, finding the seams is so important, right? Knowing how to get your own shot off in the NBA when you're not one of these either 7-footers or guy that can jump out of the gym, that is very key. So his transition, I think, is going to be kind of more seamless than most, right? Give him maybe half a season to where I think he'll start contributing something positive. And that seemed to be what Langdon was echoing to me yesterday.
And Ollie, I want to make this point really quickly. The guy that you were identifying that the Pelicans were going to go after as an assistant, James Borrega, becomes an assistant with the Pelicans, this is the type of guard that he loves to work with. And his offense is built for young men with this body type, skill set. This is the perfect tool for James Borrego.
Yeah, look, the Pelicans didn't really need to create that type of offense for anybody because they didn't have anybody, right? CJ McCollum, when he first started in Portland, ran off a lot more screens, right? Last couple of years or so, he's not doing it. He creates now his offense when he first catches on the pass. Then he goes, whether it's a screen, whether, it's making some kind of play. But I love that now they've got somebody that can do things off the ball. Even though Trey does it to an extent, he's not the type of mover that you're going to see what Hawkins is, right? He's so much more Reggie Miller, Rip Hamilton, right? Those guys. And that gives you such another important facet to, right, creating an offense, to be able to score, getting good looks. Because the Pelicans, they weren't always able to do that, right? Last year, right? They became very guardable at times.
Yeah. You want to make the defense work. And the Pelicans did not do that well at times. And I think he's going to work well with Herb Jones, another person who looks to do things off the ball. I think that there's a good meld of skills there. The Pelicans go into Summer League on July 7th. They play the first game of the Las Vegas Summer League. When they get there, they have announced a couple of players who will be on the roster in Tavian Jones and Landers Nolley. I got to see Landers Nolley play as part of the Tulane broadcast team. He is an incredible, consistent outside shooter, very long, gives you a lot of length at 6'7", 6'8", depending on how you measure him. Arm length, a 5-year player in college. So again, that Pelicans profile of maturity, having been through it, and Cincinnati, a program that did very well last year, competitively. He was at the center of that for them. What are your thoughts on who they've added?
Yeah, since I went to undergrad and I got my degree at Cincinnati, I, of course, always catch at least a few of their games every year, and he caught my eye. He's a guy that, his athleticism doesn't scream at all in an NBA player. But I'll tell you what, his height and his length and his understanding of the game, and he does things that I think he understands, which honestly is just scoring. And he does it well. So he knows how to find space, how to run off a screen, even in games when guys are overplaying, how to get to the free throw line. So I saw a guy that honestly is going to be able to step right in. Again, another one like Hawkins, who's going to be able to play the game. Now, whether he can do it and get even NBA minutes is an entirely different thing. But I like the fact that he's not going to be somebody that's going to need 2 years development, right? And the biggest thing everybody knows today's game is shooting. We're going to hammer this point every year probably until we're 80 years old, because you can never have enough shooting, and the Pelicans definitely didn't. So we really highlight Hawkins, shot close to 40% overall from three. Nolley was better, and he was fantastic on catch and shoots and off of spot ups, knockdown opportunities. So you buy him as an NBA shooter. I do. I see he can, at minimum, if he works at it, become like a Duncan Robinson, because he's about 6'6", 6'7". Length is about 6'11". So he's going to be able to get a shot over people. And the question is everything else. Can he stay on the court because of his defensive side? And in his first couple of years, I didn't really see him. Maybe you did, David, but I know you played for Memphis and Virginia Tech. So I think I only maybe caught one game, and I don't remember it. But in Cincinnati, I saw a guy who was passable defensively. And when I did some research, his senior year, he did a much better job defensively, but it's still not NBA, say, average quality, right? So that's going to somehow have to improve. But it's not a guy that's slow per se. So I think, honestly, it's just getting in the gym, right? Working on positioning, understanding where your man's going to be, having a little bit more explosive hips, right? And that's all just training. So you're a little bit quicker because he's got the length. He just has to have
3 different programs. He went through 3 different programs. He really didn't get coached well until senior year. At Cincinnati, he didn't have a lot of team success. And I think, again, he was a kid who was looking for his game and then found it as a perimeter shooter. You see the number of attempts just skyrocket the last couple of seasons. And he just figured out, I can do this. And his dad, people need to, he comes from a basketball heritage. His dad played at LSU, was also a shooter, a guy who could play really well. So, and then the Pelicans do get a big, not the big.
One thing I want to say real quick, Dave, I forgot to mention, with Nolley, he's not just a three-point shooter. When you watch him, and in the games I saw him, you know what he's good at? He's good at shooting off-balance shots. He shoots a number of off of 1 foot mid-range shots. step backs, all sorts of things that kind of are more YMCA old school. So the fact that he's honestly a poor finisher because he doesn't have the athleticism doesn't really scare me because he knows how to get his shot, create his shot, get it somewhere between what, say 25 and maybe 12 feet. And that's good enough to create yourself someday a bench off or a play or a roll off the bench for yourself.
Yeah. On up front, look, we knew that this draft did not have a lot of bigs, but the big they do get, you go to Vanderbilt, you get Liam Robbins, and he's a guy who, in only 23 minutes a game for the Vanderbilt Commodores, led the SEC in total blocks and blocks per game, averaged 15 points. Not a great rebounder, but shot 37% from three-point range. And this wasn't the only year. He averaged around 2 attempts over the last 3 seasons of his collegiate career. So a poor man's, Brooke Lopez maybe is what you're looking at this stage. A guy who's developmental and maybe in a couple years he becomes something. And if in emergency he's a third center this year.
Yeah, you could see it, right? Because look, the Pelicans might have some openings soon. We don't know what's going to happen with any of their centers. Jackson Hayes, restricted free agent. Willie Hernangomez has I think 1 more year left, but it's a team option. And the Pelicans may decide just to let him out of it, right? Not pick it up because he wants to go somewhere else and maybe they want to go in a different direction. And of course, Jonas Valanciunas, his name was in trade rumors before the deadline last year. So conceivably, the Pelicans could remake their entire roster at center position. And it wouldn't surprise me. And maybe that could create a space for Robbins. But I'll tell you what, it's going to hurt. He's not going to play in Vegas, right? He's out with a foot injury till August.
August, but he got a camp invite. And so, again, I think for him, as a big, Summer League is not really great for bigs anyway. Summer League tends to be a guard-oriented, perimeter focus of a lot of guys trying to get shots up. Unless you're just going to get a ton of rebounding numbers, and that's not his thing. He's not going to, eat the glass. He never has. In his career. So I think maybe this is the best thing. And and based on where we've been with the Pelicans and injuries, hey kid, rest, be ready for camp.
Yeah, no kidding. And you just remind me, we're going to see EJ Liddell this summer too. Let's not forget to include, we should at least talk about him some point too.
Yeah, and we'll do that. Yeah, right. Was we get before that to once they announce the full roster of who we get to see. And of course, Darren Seaburn, you're trying to see what he brings as well as a scorer and as a defender next year as well. Last thing real quick, and this is just a note, word is that the Pelicans are coming to an agreement with Aaron Miles, Boston Celtics assistant, who not that long ago, less than a month ago, people were assumed was headed to Houston to rejoin Ime Udoka's staff because he had been with the Celtics the last 2 seasons. This is kind of a coup. He and Willie Green did work together with the Warriors a long time ago, like about 8 years ago. But, this is a guy who's got a history in player development. He's coached at the collegiate level. He worked his way up through the NBA level to an assistant, doing all the work there. So he's a grinder as a coach. He's somebody Willie Green trusts, which I think is important. The 2 guys that you've added in Borrego and in Miles are people he had pre-existing relationships with that he trusts in some way. And I think this is his one chance. And I think this is something we also talked about, Ollie. If he was going to go down, let me go down with my people, the people that I need around me.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of almost been unfair, the amount of criticism he's taken in his first 2 years. For a rookie head coach, you've got to give allowances. And then suddenly you're putting him in a situation where he's honestly surrounded by unfamiliar people, right? I mean, he's only been coaching for, handful of years. What was it, 3, I think, with Golden State, a couple with Phoenix. That's, David, as we know, that's nothing compared to how long most of these coaches, right, carve out a career for 20, 30 years. So it wasn't surprising to me the mistakes that we've seen. But I do know that he has a good understanding, right? He just needs help in, I think, executing his vision. Because I don't know how many times he told us how many threes, for instance, he wants his team to shoot. When we were all harping about they're just not shooting enough threes. They were trying to pass that message, a coaching staff that is, to the players all the time. It just, like I said, it didn't translate. So getting more people that I think he trusts and probably figuring out a way to convey that message is only going to help. And of course, other areas too. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think that I wish I knew a little bit more about Aaron Miles, but I do know more about James Borrego. And I think that the fact that they've got a history together, that Borrego has certain, and we've touched on it, um, elements that he adds to where I think there's weaknesses with Willie. Like, for instance, clutch minutes. I think Willie's had some issues, right? We've talked about that because he's stubborn. He likes to resort to what he knows at times. That's where with clutch minutes, you've got to go more by, I feel like, feel of the game, what's going on, right? Unless you have a Chris Paul out there, but the Pelicans don't, right? So I think Borrego is going to help in that instance. So, like I said, having suddenly these fresh faces that he's familiar with who bring certain things, qualities that he may lack, it's going to help.
Like you said, that last year in Charlotte, Borrego's team led the NBA in 3-point attempt. Well, top 5, excuse me, in 3-point attempts, percentage, makes. They were doing and pace, and so everything that the Pelicans fans did not see last
year. They overachieved too, Dave. That's a big thing for me. Remember, Willie Green kind of overachieved
10 games in 2
Everything else has been underachieving, so that helps. Yeah,
and like you said with the clutch numbers, no matter how bad they were, from year to year, they were still good in clutch games.
Yeah.
And that was
every year. Yeah.
Every year. So yeah, it didn't matter what level of talent he was going to get. He squeezed the most out of it in the most intense situations. So that's that pretty much covers it for the draft. We will get with you, like we said, as soon as the Pelicans announce that Summer League roster. We'll talk about what we'd like to see there. And we will have more stuff coming for you on the bird rights. Oleh, any final words before we get out of here?
Yeah, definitely Summer League stuff. It's good to be back. And of course, free agency. Yeah, we got to solve this center position. So we're going to be talking about that a lot too.
Yep, you're right. Until the next time, he is Oleh Kosel. I am David Grubb. And this has been the Bird Watch.